You think this is a story about a monster? It isn't. It's a story about a man who turned humiliation into revenue and built an empire from the sound of people screaming. Look at this ledger. April 1848. 14,000 pounds in dividends. Signed in perfect copper plate. The world called him a creature. He called it market demand. Tonight, I'm not showing you a tragedy. I'm showing you how the most disfigured man in England bought his freedom, bought his circus, and eventually bought the very village that tried to starve him. Now, let's open the book. But I am not opening this ledger to show you a drawing of a beast. I am opening it to page 114. Look at this column. Run your finger down the ink. You see it? 1848. April. Dividend payout. 14,000 pounds sterling. And there next to it, the signature. Not an X, not a jagged scrawl. A signature written in the finest, most elegant copper plate script you have ever seen. The world called him a creature to be pitied, a thing to be caged and gawked at for a penny a peek. But looking at these numbers, cold, hard, unfeeling mathematics, I tell you this, he was the only man in the history of our wretched business who knew exactly what a scream was worth. This is not a story about how he was cured. There is no cure for the hand fate deals you before you draw your first breath. This is a story about how a man, trapped in a prison of flesh that terrified the world, decided that if he was going to be a nightmare, he would at least own the copyright. To understand the entry in 1848, we must go back 20 years prior. We must go back to the mud, the stench, and the flickering torchlight of what we politely called the traveling curiosities, but which you know by a truer name, the freak show. Picture the year 1828, the north of England, a fairground on the edge of a mining town where the soot turns the afternoon sky into twilight before tea time. The air smells of roasted chestnuts, horse manure, and unwashed bodies. There's a tent at the far end of the midway, canvas patched with tar, guarded by a man with a cane and a voice that could peel paint off a barn door. Inside that tent sat our protagonist. At this stage of his life, he had no name, at least none that anyone bothered to use. He was the pachyderm man, the golem, the burden. He sat on a reinforced wooden stool because a normal chair would splinter under the density of his frame. Let me describe him to you, not to horrify you, but so you understand the architecture of his prison. The condition began in the womb, a proliferation of skin and bone that never knew when to stop growing. His right arm was a heavy, useless pendulum of folded skin, twice the circumference of a normal man's thigh. His head, well, his head was the true tragedy. A massive, bony protuberance grew from his forehead, pushing his features down and to the left, burying his left eye in a cavern of flesh, leaving only the right eye clear. A blue, piercing eye that saw everything. To speak, he had to hold his heavy lip with his good left hand, otherwise his words were nothing but muffled groans. The public saw a beast. They paid their pennies, shuffled into the tent, and they gasped. Some laughed, driven by that nervous hysteria that seizes the ignorant when they face the unknown. Others threw rotting apples. Most just stared, eyes wide, feeding on his misery to make their own small gray lives feel a little more normal. At least I am not him, they thought. But here is what the crowd missed. Here is what the owner of the show, a drunkard named Silas Grinchley, missed entirely. While they were staring at him, he was staring back. He was not an idiot. He was not a mindless animal. Trapped inside that fortress of distorted bone was a mind as sharp as a diamond cutter's chisel. While he sat there, hour after hour, being insulted and jeered at, he was not crying. He was counting. He counted the number of patrons who entered every 20 minutes. He calculated the average spend per head based on the sound of the coins hitting the tin box at the door. He observed the cadence of the barker, which words made the people step forward, which threats made the women cling to their husbands, opening their purses faster. He noticed that if he shifted his weight and let out a low, mournful sigh, exactly when the light hit his worst angle, the crowd would go silent, and the tip jar would fill faster. He was conducting market research from inside the cage. By night, when the crowds were gone and the tent was cold, Silas would toss him a loaf of stale bread and a bucket of water, locking the cage door with a heavy iron padlock. Silas would go to the tavern to drink away the profits, boasting about his gold mine. But the gold mine had a secret. In the straw of his cage, buried beneath the damp earth where he slept, lay a small velvet pouch. For 10 years, our hero had played a dangerous game. When the drunks threw coins directly at him to see if he would flinch, he didn't just deflect them. He would let them fall into the deep folds of his oversized coat. He learned to move his good hand with the speed of a pickpocket, snatching a silver shilling from the sawdust before Silas could spot it. He saved on food. He was entitled to 3 meals. He ate 1. He traded his rations with the stable boys for information. Newspapers, old books, scraps of knowledge about the outside world. He taught himself to read by studying discarded broadsheets by moonlight. He learned about contract law. He learned about property rights. He learned the value of a pound sterling. By the time he was 25, the man they treated like an animal had more liquid capital hidden in his straw mattress than the man who owned him had in the bank. The breaking point came in November. It was a bitter night, the kind that freezes the mud into sharp peaks that cut through leather boots. Silas had come into the tent drunk, swinging a lantern that threatened to set the dry canvas ablaze. He was angry. Some debt collector had found him. Some gambling loss had soured his mood. He stood before the cage, poking the hero with his cane. "Get up, beast," Silas had slurred. "Up. Show me you're worth the feed." The hero did not move. He sat in the shadows, his blue eye fixed on the drunkard. "I said get up." Silas struck him across the shoulder, a heavy blow. It didn't hurt. The layers of skin were too thick there, but it was the indignity. The hero had tolerated the staring. He had tolerated the insults, but he had promised himself on the dark nights when the cold bit deep that he would never be struck. Not by a man who couldn't even multiply 6 by 7. The hero stood up. He did not growl. He did not attack. He simply rose to his full height, the sheer mass of him casting a shadow that swallowed Silas whole. He reached into his coat. With his good hand, Silas raised the cane again, fear flashing in his watery eyes, expecting violence. But the hero did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a bag. He threw it. It landed on the wooden crate between them with a heavy, metallic thud. The sound of gold, real gold, the universal language. Silas froze. He looked at the bag, then at the monster. "What did you steal?" Silas hissed, though he was already reaching for the drawstrings. "Count it." The voice was rough, labored like grinding stones, but the command was clear. The hero adjusted his lip with his hand to speak again. Buy out. Silas poured the coins onto the crate. Sovereigns, guineas, silver crowns. It was a fortune for a man of the road. It was enough to buy a small farm or a tavern or 3 new wagons. This is my money, Silas snarled, trying to sweep it into his pocket. You earned it on my stage. Read the contract, the hero rumbled, pointing a heavy finger at the ledger Silas kept in his coat. Standard indentured clause. Any income above maintenance belong to owner unless buy-out price is met. Silas blinked. He remembered the contract. He'd written the buyout clause as a joke, a sum so high he laughed when he inked it, thinking a creature like this would never see a halfpenny of his own. 500 pounds. The gold on the crate was counted. 510 pounds. The hero had overpaid, just to be sure. Silas looked at the money. Then he looked at the creature. The greed in his eyes fought with the desire for control. But greed is a relentless, undefeated champion in the hearts of small men. He realized he could take this gold, abandon the beast here in the middle of nowhere, and find a new attraction by next week. Why keep feeding this massive eater when the cash was right there? You want to go? Silas sneered, scooping the coins into his filthy shirt. Fine, go. But mark me, boy. You walk out that flap and the world eats you. In here, you're an asset. Out there, you're a target. You'll be dead in a ditch by Tuesday. The hero didn't answer. He simply extended his hand for the paper. Silas scrawled a release note, signed it with a jagged X, and threw it on the dirt floor. Our hero picked it up. He did not look back. He wrapped his heavy cloak tight around his misshapen shoulders, pulled the oversized hood low over his brow, and walked out into the freezing night. For the first time in 25 years, the air tasted different. It didn't smell of sawdust. It smelled of terrifying, unlimited oxygen. He walked for 3 nights. He moved only in the deepest darkness, sleeping in hedgerows during the day, covering himself with leaves like a forgotten ruin. He knew Silas was right about one thing. He could not just walk into a town. A man of his stature with his gait creates a panic just by existing. He needed a strategy. He found it in a village called Oakhaven. It was a sleepy hamlet nestled in a valley where the fog hung low and people minded their own business because nothing ever happened there. It was the perfect place for a ghost to hide. He found an abandoned shop on the edge of the village, a dilapidated structure that had once been a cobbler's. The sign was rotting. The windows were grime-encrusted. He approached the landlord, a blind widow who lived in the cottage next door. This was his first stroke of luck, or perhaps his first calculated risk. She could not see his deformity. She could only hear the low, rumbling courtesy of his voice and feel the weight of the advance rent he placed in her hand. He didn't introduce himself as a former exhibit. He introduced himself as Mr. H., a craftsman seeking solitude for his delicate work. He spent the first month turning that ruin into a fortress. He boarded up the front windows from the inside, leaving only small slivers at the top to let in light. He reinforced the doors. He built a workspace in the back room, far from the street. He had a skill, you see. In the endless boring hours of the circus, he had not only read books, he had tinkered. He had large, heavy hands, yes, fingers that looked like sausages, but the muscle control in them was absolute. He could hold a pen steadier than a surgeon. He had watched the circus repairmen fix music boxes and automata. He understood gears. He understood that machines, unlike people, did not judge. If you put the gear in the right place, it turned. It didn't care who placed it there. He decided to become a clockmaker. It was an audacious disguise, a monster making the most delicate instruments of civilization, but it was brilliant. People don't need to see the clockmaker. They only need to see the clock. He set up a system. He built a small wooden hatch in the side door of the shop. Customers would leave their broken timepieces in a box outside and ring a bell. He would wait for them to leave, pull the box in, repair the item, and place it back out with a bill. For 6 months it worked. Oh, the irony of those days. I look at the ledger here. Expenses for tiny brass springs, vials of oil, magnifying lenses. Imagine him, this giant of a man, hunching over a workbench in the candlelight. The silence of that room must have been a symphony to him. No barking orders, no screaming children, just the rhythmic tick-tock, tick-tock of the order he was restoring to the world. He felt, for a fleeting season, human. He wore a simple linen shirt. He made tea. He read the local gazette. He heard the villagers gossiping outside his shop about the mysterious master mechanic who could fix a watch that had been dead for 20 years. They didn't know the hands that polished the gold casing were the same hands they would have shuddered to touch. He was earning a living. Not a fortune, but a living. He had bought dignity. But a lie, no matter how carefully constructed, is like a dam with a microscopic crack. You cannot hold back the weight of the water forever. It was a Tuesday afternoon in high summer. The heat was oppressive, heavy, and still. In the village, tempers were short. The hero was working on a grandfather clock, a massive piece that required him to have the back door of his workshop slightly ajar for ventilation. He felt safe. He was on the private side of the building, enclosed by a high fence he had repaired himself. He had forgotten the human element. Curiosity. A group of local boys, bored and daring each other to feats of bravery, had been whispering about the hermit of the clock shop. Why did he never come out? Was he a foreign spy? A criminal on the run? A wizard? One of them, the son of the village baker, a lad of 12 with more courage than sense, had climbed the old oak tree that overlooked the shop's backyard. The hero was engrossed in his work. He had removed his heavy hood because of the heat. For the first time, he was exposed. The afternoon sun fell directly onto his face, onto the protruding bone, the hanging folds of grayish skin, the cavernous mouth. From the branches of the oak tree, a sound shattered the peace of Oak Haven. It was a scream, not of surprise, but of primal, unadulterated terror. The boy fell from the branch, scrambling in the dirt, still screaming, running towards the market square. Monster! A demon! There's a demon in the shop! Inside the workshop, the hero froze. The delicate gear he was holding slipped from his tweezers and rolled across the floor. Tick, 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 tick. It spun to a stop. He knew that sound. He had heard it thousands of times in the tent. But there, it was part of the show. There, it was paid for. Here in this sanctuary, that scream didn't mean profit. It meant war. He stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He moved to the window, peering through the crack in the boards. He saw them coming. Not a customer with a broken watch. Not the blind landlady with a basket. of eggs. He saw the baker. He saw the blacksmith. He saw a crowd gathering at the end of the street, tools in their hands, their faces twisted with that old, familiar mix of fear and aggression. They weren't coming to admire his work. They were coming to burn out the infection in their midst. The illusion of the clockmaker was dead. The golden cage of the circus was gone. He was alone in a house made of wood and glass, and the world was knocking at the door. There are moments in history when a single sound can alter the trajectory of a life, echoing louder than cannon fire. For our hero, it was not the roar of a crowd or the crack of a whip. It was the frantic, scrabbling noise of that baker's boy scrambling away in the dirt, screaming, "Demon!" until his voice cracked. Inside the shop, the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the lungs. He did not run. Where would he go? He stood by the window, peering through the slat, watching the dust settle where the boy had fallen. He saw the village freeze. The blacksmith dropped his hammer. The women stopped their chatter at the well. It was as if the pulse of Oak Haven had skipped a beat. They did not come with torches. They did not come with pitchforks. That is the stuff of bad novels. Reality is far more practical and far colder. They simply withdrew. An hour passed, then two. He saw the baker, a man he had bought bread from every Tuesday by leaving a coin on the step, walk to the front of his own shop, lock the door, and turn the sign to closed, staring directly at the clockmaker's window as he did so. Then the butcher did the same. The street emptied. Mothers called their children inside, their voices sharp and hushed. By twilight, the vibrant, bustling lane was a ghost town. The message was absolute. We will not touch you, because we fear what you are, but we will not let you live among us. He checked his inventory. He had half a loaf of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a canister of tea leaves. He had water from the pump in the backyard, provided they didn't cut the line. He had money. Oh yes, he still had nearly 300 pounds in gold and silver hidden beneath the floorboards. A fortune. But gold is edible only in fairy tales. For 3 days, the siege held. He attempted on the second night to leave the shop under the cover of a moonless sky. He wore his heaviest cloak, the hood pulled so low he could barely see his own feet. He walked to the pump. A stone flew out of the darkness, striking the wood inches from his hand. "Go back to hell," a voice whispered from the shadows. Not a scream, a statement. He retreated. He drank water and ate the last of the cheese. He tried to work on a pocket watch, his magnification loupe screwed into his good eye, but his hands, usually steady as bedrock, were shaking. It was the hunger, yes. But it was also the crushing weight of a revelation. It does not matter what I build. It does not matter how precise my gears are. To them, the machine is broken because the casing is ugly. On the 5th day, the hunger became a physical pain, a dull knife twisting in his gut. The smell of baking bread from across the street was a torture designed by a cruel artist. He watched through the crack as the village went about its business. They laughed, they traded, they lived, and they did it all while pointedly ignoring the boarded-up shop in their midst, as if pretending it didn't exist would make him evaporate. He had a choice. He could stay and die. They would eventually find his body, grimace, and burn the shop down to cleanse it. Or he could leave. But leaving meant walking. And walking, for a man with a hip that ground bone against bone with every step, and a lung capacity diminished by the crushing weight of his chest. It was not a journey, it was an ordeal. He waited for a storm. It came a week later, a lashing, violent gale that drove even the bravest watchman indoors. The rain turned the dirt road to sludge. It was perfect. Nature was providing the cover that humanity refused. He packed a single rucksack. He took his tools, the screwdrivers, the loop, the pliers. He took the ledger where he had tracked his repairs. He took the heavy bag of coins, sewing them into the lining of his coat to distribute the weight. He opened the back door. The wind howled, ripping the door from his grip, slamming it against the wall. He flinched, waiting for the shout of discovery. Nothing. Just the rain. He stepped out. He did not look back at the clock shop. That dream was dead. The Mr. H who fixed time was gone. The road was a nightmare. Every step in the mud required a Herculean effort. His right leg, the one thickened by layers of fibrous tissue, dragged behind him like a ship's anchor. He fell twice in the first mile, face planting into the cold mire, tasting dirt and despair. Each time, he lay there for a minute, the rain drumming against his back, listening to the wheeze of his own breath. "Stay down," a voice in his head whispered. "Just stay down. The cold will take you before dawn. It will be gentle." But he had the ledger in his pocket. He had the tools. He pushed himself up. He walked for 3 weeks. He avoided towns. He became a creature of the hedgerows again, sleeping in abandoned barns, under stone bridges, in the hollows of ancient trees. He ate raw turnips stolen from fields. He caught a rabbit once, skinning it with the precision of a watchmaker, roasting it over a tiny, smokeless fire. He was losing weight. His clothes hung on his frame like drapes on a scaffold. The skin on his face, already heavy, seemed to sag further with exhaustion, pulling his left eye almost completely shut. He was dying. He knew it. He could feel the cold settling deep in his marrow, a frost that the sun could no longer touch. And then he saw the poster. It was pinned to a fence post at a crossroads, fluttering in the breeze, a garish, peeling lithograph of a woman standing on a horse, her smile frozen in red ink. Below it, in bold, confident letters, "The gigantic Emporium of Wonders, 5 miles east. See the unseen." He stared at it. He felt a wave of nausea. The circus, the place of his torment, the cage. But below the nausea, there was something else. A pull, a memory of warmth, a memory of food. He stood at the crossroads for an hour. The path to the left led to an unknown town, where he would likely be stoned or arrested for vagrancy. The path to the right led to the Emporium, to the smell of sawdust, to the familiar rhythm of exploitation. He could go back. He could find the owner. He could say, "Look at me. I am a monster. Put me in a cage. Feed me, and I will let them stare." It was the ultimate surrender. It was selling his soul for a bowl of stew. He turned right, but he didn't walk with the shuffle of a defeated man. He walked with a limp, yes, but his head was up. Because a thought had occurred to him, a small, dangerous spark in the dark cavern of his mind. He still had the money. He still had the tools. And he still had the brain that had memorized Silas Grinchley's accounts. He wasn't going to the circus to be the bear. He was going to see if he could be the bear tamer. The gigantic Emporium of Wonders was a lie, even by the loose standards of the profession. As he approached the encampment at dusk, moving through the tree line, he saw a disaster. The main tent was sagging, one of its central poles cracked and splinted with rope. The wagons were peeling their paint gray with grime. The horses in the makeshift corral were rib thin, their heads low. There was no music, no laughter, just the sounds of coughing and the shouting of men who haven't been paid in weeks. He crept closer. He hid behind a stack of hay bales near the main campfire. He watched. He saw the director, a man in a velvet coat that had seen better decades, holding a bottle of cheap gin like a holy relic. His name, as the hero would later learn, was Mr. Augustus Sallow. Sallow was pacing, screaming at a clown who was trying to darn a sock. "Where's the crowd, Boppo? Where? I was promised a crowd. The advance man said this town was ripe." "The advance man quit 3 weeks ago, Augustus," the clown replied wearily. "And we have no posters left? Then paint some. Use your face paint." Sallow took a swig of gin, nearly stumbling into the fire. "We need receipts by Saturday or the bank takes the ponies. You hear me? They take the ponies." Our hero watched. He observed the operation. He saw the layout. It was inefficient. The ticket booth was placed downwind of the animal cages. Who wants to buy a ticket while smelling hyena dung? The lights were arranged to illuminate the mud, not the banners. The performers were tired, yes, but they were also disorganized. There was no flow. It was a machine with broken gears. He knew exactly which gear was stripped. He waited until the camp slept. The fire had died down to embers. Mr. Sallow had passed out in his folding chair outside his wagon, the empty bottle rolling in the grass. The hero emerged from the shadows. He moved silently despite his bulk. He picked up the bottle and set it on the table. He sat on a crate opposite the sleeping drunkard, and he waited. The sun rose, gray and unforgiving. Mr. Sallow stirred, groaned, and opened one bleary eye. He blinked. He rubbed his face. He opened his eyes again. He screamed. It was a strangled yelp, a sound of pure alcoholic terror. He scrambled back in his chair, nearly tipping over. "Devil, specter, God have mercy!" Sallow flailed for a weapon, grabbing a ladle from a bucket. The hero did not move. He sat perfectly still, his large hands folded on his lap, his heavy cloak obscuring most of his body, but the hood was down. The morning light caught the chaotic ridges of his skull. "Good morning," the hero said. His voice was deep, resonant, a sound like boulders grinding underwater. Sallow hyperventilated. What are you? A haunt? Did the gin conjure you?" I'm not a haunt," the hero replied slowly, spacing his words to accommodate the difficulty of his lip. An auditor." Sallow blinked. The words seemed to confuse him more than the face. "A what?" The hero reached into his cloak. Sallow flinched, expecting claws. Instead, the hero produced a small, leather-bound notebook, his own observations from the night before, and a pouch, a heavy pouch. He placed the pouch on the table. It clinked. Sallow's eyes darted from the monster to the pouch. "Money?" "Investment," the hero said. Sallow slowly lowered the ladle. The terror was still there, vibrant and shaking, but the curiosity of a desperate man was waking up. "Who are you?" "My name," the hero rumbled, "is irrelevant." "What is relevant is that your tent is leaking revenue." He opened his notebook. He pointed to a page where he had sketched the camp layout in charcoal. Ticket, booth, location, wrong, smell, drives, ladies, away, lighting, flat, no, mystery. You are selling reality. People pay wonder. Sallow stared at the sketch. He looked at the heavy, misshapen finger tracing the lines. You? You watched us? I calculated you. The hero leaned forward. Sallow pressed his back against the wagon, trembling. You owe the bank, the hero stated. It wasn't a question. Your horses acted starving. Your juggler is drunk. You have 7 days before collapse. Sallow swallowed hard. How do you know that? Math, the hero said simply. He tapped his temple with a deformed knuckle. It is the only thing that does not lie. And what do you want? Sallow whispered. You want a job? To be in the pit? We have a giantess, but she's quit. We have an opening for a... He gestured vaguely at the hero's face. The hero's good eye narrowed. The air temperature seemed to drop. No, he growled. I do not sit on the stage. He pushed the pouch of coins toward Sallow. I sit in the office. Sallow laughed, a hysterical, frightened bark. You run the show? Look at you, man. You'd scare the sheriff before he could issue the permit. I can't have you in the front office. People would burn the wagons. Exactly, the hero said. He reached into his bag again and pulled out a mask. It was a simple thing he had fashioned on the road from sackcloth, crudely stitched with holes for his eyes. He held it up. I will not be seen, the hero explained. I stay in the wagon. I write the scripts. I count the coin. I fix the machine. And if I say no, Sallow challenged, though his hand was already creeping toward the money pouch, then the bank takes the ponies, the hero said. He started to pull the pouch back. Sallow's hand slammed down on the money. Wait. He looked at the strange, terrifying figure before him. A monster in a muddy cloak who spoke like a banker and smelled of rain and iron. It was insane. It was madness. But Sallow opened the pouch. He saw the shine of silver. You fix the books? Sallow asked, his voice trembling. You keep the creditors off my back? I will make you rich, the hero promised. But I have conditions. What conditions? One, the hero said, raising a finger. I am a partner. 50% of net profit. 50, Sallow sputtered. You're mad. Who else is offering you gold? The hero waited. 2, I am never to be disturbed in daylight. 3, I make the rules. You are the face. I am the brain. Sallow looked at the rotting tents. He looked at the starving horses. He looked at the bottle of gin he couldn't afford to replace. Then he looked at the pouch. 50%, Sallow grumbled, defeated by his own failure. But you stay hidden. If the townsfolk see you, they'll hang us both. They will not see me, the hero said, standing up. The sheer size of him blotted out the sun. They will only feel me. He extended his large, deformed hand. Sallow hesitated, looking at the gray, folded skin. Then, driven by greed and desperation, he shook it. The deal was struck. That evening, the Starlight Troop did not open its gates. Instead, under the flickering light of lanterns, a strange thing happened. A voice, deep, muffled, coming from behind the closed curtains of the director's wagon, began barking orders. Move! The wagons, the voice commanded. Create a maze. Do not let them see the whole tent at once. Make them turn corners. Make them wonder. The roustabouts grumbled, but they moved. Change the lighting, The voice continued. Shadows are cheaper than paint and more effective. For the next 3 days, the hero did not sleep. He sat in the cramped wagon surrounded by Sallow's chaotic receipts. He organized, he cut costs, he rewrote the introductions for the acts. He realized that Sallow had been trying to make the circus respectable. He had been trying to compete with theater. The hero knew this was wrong. People didn't come to a traveling show for respectability. They came for the freedom of the unknown. They came to be unsettled. He drafted a new script for the Barker. He threw out the flowery poetry. He replaced it with questions. What lies behind the veil? Is it beast or man? Dare you look? He was using his own life as the template. He was weaponizing the curiosity that had destroyed his shop in Oak Haven. On Saturday night, the troupe reopened in a new town, Durham. The gates opened. The crowd trickled in. Sallow stood at the front, nervous, sweating in his velvet coat. He recited the new lines the hero had written. He lowered his voice. He gestured to the shadows, and the crowd stopped talking. They leaned in. They didn't push past him. They listened. And then they bought tickets. From the dark window of the supply wagon, hidden behind a thick velvet drape, a single blue eye watched. He heard the coins hitting the box. Clink, clink, clink. It was a different rhythm this time. It wasn't the sound of charity. It wasn't the sound of pity. It was the sound of leverage. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the product. He was the merchant. But as the money began to flow, and Sallow's smile grew wider and greedier with every poured drink, our hero turned his gaze to the ledger on his desk. He dipped his quill in black ink. He wrote the date. He wrote the total take. And then, at the bottom of the page, he wrote a note to himself in that perfect swirling copper plate. He thinks he has hired a savior. He does not know he has invited the foreclosure. The rescue was over. The takeover had begun. In the archives of the grand banking houses of London, there is a saying, silent money buys the loudest noise. It is a truth that my profession, the theatrical arts, has always tried to ignore. We prefer to believe in applause, in the adoration of the crowd, in the magic of the spotlight. But the man in the wagon knew better. He knew that the spotlight is nothing but a beam of light cutting through dust, and the hand that controls the switch is the hand that truly rules the room. For 6 months, the circus, Mr. Sallow's ragged, failing troupe, underwent a transformation so profound it was akin to alchemy. But it was not magic, it was management. From his hidden sanctuary behind the velvet curtains of the administrative wagon, our hero dismantled the machine and rebuilt it, gear by rusted gear. He stopped the roustabouts from giving free passes to the local barmaids. He audited the feed bills for the elephants and discovered the supplier was charging double for hay that was half rot. He fired the drunken juggler and hired a local fire eater who worked for bread and ambition. But his greatest invention was the veil of mystery. Before his arrival, the circus shouted its wares. Step right up. See the bearded lady. See the strong man. It was desperate. It smelled of begging. The hero changed the script. He wrote new lines for Sallow to bellow from the podium. Instead of shouting, see the terrible wolf man, Sallow was instructed to whisper, can you bear to look at what lies behind the black curtain? Is your heart strong enough for the truth? The psychological shift was instantaneous. He understood from his own painful life that human beings are not drawn to what is obvious. They are drawn to what is forbidden. By hiding the attractions, by dimming the lights, by creating silence where there used to be noise, he turned the carnival into a temple of curiosity. The crowds doubled, then tripled. Every night, Sallow stood out there, basking in the roar, bowing as the coins rained down. He bought a new top hat, silk, from a haberdasher in Leeds. He bought a gold-tipped cane. He started drinking brandy instead of gin. He began to believe his own press. He looked in the mirror and saw a genius impresario, conveniently forgetting the misshapen shadow hunched over the ledgers in the wagon, scratching out the strategy that paid for his brandy. The hero did not care about the glory. He cared about the cut. Every Sunday morning, regardless of the weather, Sallow would stumble into the wagon, hungover and smelling of cigar smoke, to settle accounts. The hero would be waiting, his large, bandaged hands resting on the book. "Another record week," Sallow would crow, tossing a bag of receipts on the desk. "I had them eating out of my hand, didn't I?" The way I paused before the lion acts, sheer poetry. "The receipts," the hero would rumble, ignoring the vanity. They would count. The pile of silver and gold grew high, and then, with the meticulous precision of a bank clerk, the hero would divide it. 50% to the house, which Sallow treated as his personal purse. 50% to the partner, the ghost. Sallow watched the hero take his share with growing resentment. In the beginning, he had been grateful. He had been desperate. But gratitude is like milk. Left out in the heat of success, it sours quickly. Sallow looked at this creature, this man who had to use a modified spoon to eat soup, whose face made horses shy away, and he felt a stinging indignity. "Why am I splitting my gold with a monster?" he thought. "I am the face. I am the voice. He is just a bookkeeper with a bad deformity." But the hero saw the look in Sallow's eyes. He saw the way Sallow's gaze lingered on the money pouch. He heard the slight sneer in the thank you that became shorter and sharper with every passing week. The hero knew that a contract with a greedy man is only as strong as your ability to enforce it. And he knew that Sallow was a man who, given enough brandy and enough time, would try to break the lock. So, the hero did not sleep. While Sallow slept off his drunk, our hero worked. He didn't spend his 50%. He didn't buy fine clothes. What use were they? He didn't buy better food. He didn't send money to a family he didn't have. Instead, he hired a messenger, a discreet boy from the village, paid well to deliver letters. The hero began to write to the people Sallow owed money to. Not the new debts, those were paid. The old debts, the dead horses of the past. The money Sallow had borrowed 5 years ago from a loan shark in Manchester to buy a tiger that died a week later. The gambling debts from Liverpool. The outstanding balance on the wagons from a builder in York. Sallow had ignored these creditors, thinking he could outrun them by moving towns. But the hero found them. He wrote to them, offering to buy the debt for pennies on the pound. "Mr. Sallow cannot pay you," the letter said in elegant copperplate. "I will pay you 20% of the value today, in cash, if you transfer the deed of debt to the bearer of this note." It was a classic financial maneuver, older than the Roman Empire, but in the muddy, chaotic world of the traveling circus, it was unheard of. Creditors, assuming they would never see a dime from the notorious drunkard Augustus Sallow, happily took the cash. They signed the papers. One by one, the promissory notes arrived in the mail. thick yellowed parchment stamped with wax seals, notes that said, "I, Augustus Sallow, owe the sum of..." The hero did not frame them. He placed them in a black iron box beneath his desk. He was not just counting the money anymore. He was buying the floor Sallow stood on. The climax of this silent war came in November, as the troop camped on the Iowa outskirts of Newcastle. The weather had turned vicious. Cold rain lashed the tents, turning the fairground into a bog. The crowds were thin for 3 nights in a row. Sallow's mood, fragile at the best of times, shattered. The brandy bottle was empty, and the cash box was light. He paced the wet grass outside the hero's wagon, kicking at the mud. He needed money. He had promised a girl in the town a necklace. He had a tab at the tavern, and he looked at the wagon, the warm, dry wagon where the partner sat, and the resentment finally boiled over into rage. Sallow climbed the wooden steps and threw open the door. The hero was there, as always, lit by a single kerosene lamp. He was reading a treatise on hydraulic mechanics. He didn't look up. "We need to talk," Sallow slurred, wet hair plastered to his forehead. "Talk is expensive," the hero replied, turning a page, "and the fire is low." "Don't give me that smart mouth riddling," Sallow snapped, stepping into the small space. The smell of rain and old alcohol filled the room. "I've been looking at the numbers, the split. It's not working." The hero closed the book gently. He adjusted the shade on the lamp. The light cast deep, distorted shadows of his profile against the wall, the massive brow, the heavy trunk-like growth. "We have a contract," he said softly. "A contract with a ghost." Sallow laughed, bitter and sharp. "I do all the work. I stand in the rain. I charm the mayor. I smile at the ladies. You sit in here like a fat spider. And you take half? Half! I run the business," the hero said. "Without me, you have no tents." "I have the tents." Sallow slammed his hand on the desk. "It's my name on the side. Augustus Sallow's Emporium. Mine." He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing with a malicious idea that had been festering for days. "I got a new plan," Sallow whispered. "The crowd is bored of the jugglers. They're bored of the ponies. We need a new headliner. Something shocking, something monstrous." The hero went very still. His blue eye locked onto Sallow's watery gaze. "No," the hero said. "Yes," Sallow hissed. "Think of the money, partner. Real money. We don't hide you anymore. We put you on the throne. The Beast King. We bill you as the mistake of nature. People will pay double just to see if you have toes. I bought my freedom." The hero's voice was a low growl now, a vibration in the floorboards. "I am not stock." "You are what I say you are," Sallow shouted. "I'm the director. I own this show. And I say you go on stage tomorrow night or you get out. You understand? You go back to the gutter, back to the roadside. See how long you last without my protection." It was the ultimate threat, the threat of exposure. Sallow believed in his drunken arrogance that the hero's entire existence depended on his charity. He thought he held the leash. The hero looked at the man. He didn't see a threat. He saw a ledger entry that needed to be closed. Slowly, painfully, the hero stood up. In the small wagon, his height was overwhelming. Sallow took a half step back, but held his ground, smirking. "Well," Sallow sneered, "what's it going to be? The cage or the cold?" The hero reached down, not for a weapon, not for a coat. He reached for the black iron box. He placed it on the desk. He unlocked it with a small key that hung around his neck. He opened the lid. I choose, the hero said, reaching into the box. The book. He pulled out the first paper. What's this? Sallow asked, squinting. Promissory note, 1823. Liverpool, farrier, bank, loan for 4 horses, unpaid, acquired by bearer 3 months ago. The hero dropped the paper on the desk. He pulled out another. Debt note, Manchester canvas, works unpaid, interest compounded, acquired by bearer. Drop. Sallow's face went pale. The smirk vanished. And this, the hero pulled out a thick bundle tied with red string. Mortgage on the wagons, First National Bank, foreclosure, rights, transferable. He dropped the bundle. It hit the desk with a heavy final sound. The sound of a judge's gavel. Total outstanding debt, the hero recited from memory, £2,400. Current owner of debt. He pointed a massive gnarled finger at his own chest. Me. Sallow stared at the pile of papers. He reached out with a trembling hand, picking one up, reading the signature at the bottom. Sold to the anonymous holder. You can't, Sallow stammered. I'm the owner. You are the debtor, the hero corrected, and I am calling the loan. I don't have the money, Sallow whispered. You know I don't. Then the hero leaned forward, his face emerging into the light, looking not like a monster, but like a titan of industry carved from granite. I accept payment in assets. Assets? The show, the hero said. The wagons, the name, the tents, the horses, all of it. He pushed a fresh document across the desk. It was a transfer of ownership already written out in that beautiful copperplate script. The ink was still black and sharp. Sign, the hero commanded, or the sheriff comes in the morning. Debtor's prison is cold. Augustus, much colder than this wagon. Sallow looked at the document. Then he looked at the rain slashing against the window. He thought of the stone walls of the prison. He thought of the hard labor. He looked at the creature he had planned to put in a cage and realized with a sickening jolt that he was the one who had been in the trap all along. The silence in the wagon was absolute. Sallow picked up the quill. His hand shook so badly he dripped ink on the wood. He signed. It wasn't a signature. It was a surrender. Pack your bag, the hero said, taking the paper and blowing on the ink to dry it. You leave tonight. But where will I go? Sallow whimpered, suddenly small, stripped of his velvet coat bravado. The road, the hero answered, turning back to his books. I hear it is a good teacher. Sallow stumbled out into the rain, a man evicting himself from his own life. The door clicked shut. The hero was alone. He picked up the transfer deed. He folded it carefully and placed it in the ledger. He didn't smile. Business is not about smiling. But he reached out and snuffed the lamp, plunging the wagon into darkness. For the first time, the darkness didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a boardroom. But ownership was only the beginning. Now he had an empire to build, and he had to do it without ever showing his face to the subjects of his kingdom. He had to invent a way to rule without a crown, to command without a voice, and to ensure that the gray gentleman became more than a rumor. He had to become a myth, and for that, he would need one final daring deception. a deception that would require him to hire a face far prettier than his own. With Sallow gone, the vacuum in the center of the circus was absolute. A troupe of acrobats, lion tamers, and roustabouts stood in the morning drizzle, looking at the closed door of the director's wagon. They were waiting for orders. They were waiting for pay. And they were waiting to see who or what would emerge. But he did not emerge. Instead, a slot in the door slid open. A small brass opening polished to a shine. A hand, gloved in thick black leather, pushed a piece of paper through. It was not a request. It was a roster, a schedule, and a bank draft for overdue wages, drawn on a reputable London account. The men stared at the paper. They looked at the heavy lock on the door. And then, without a word, they went to work. They understood the new language of the Emporium. It was the language of efficiency. But a ghost cannot sign permits. A ghost cannot shake hands with the mayor or bribe the local magistrate. The hero knew that the world demanded a face it could look at without flinching. He needed a mask, but this time he would not wear it. He would hire it. He found him in a theatrical agency in London, a failed actor named Archibald Thorne. Thorne was handsome in that vacant, chin-heavy way that aristocrats admire. He had a booming voice, a winning smile, and absolutely no head for numbers. He was perfect. The hero hired him not as a partner, but as a front man. Thorne was given a magnificent suit of white linen, a cane topped with crystal, and a strict script. "You will smile," the hero wrote in his instructions. "You will bow. You will accept the compliments of the ladies. But you will never, under any circumstances, make a decision involving more than 5 shillings. For the next 30 years, the public believed Archibald Thorne was the genius behind the greatest show on earth. They cheered him as he rode into town on a white stallion. They toasted him at dinners. But every night, after the applause faded, Thorne would return to the central complex of wagons. He would knock 3 times on the door of a large, black, windowless carriage that followed the troupe like a monolith. He would slip the day's report through the brass slot, and from the darkness inside, a low, muffled voice, deep as a cello string, would give him his marching orders for the next day. It was the perfect magic trick. The hero was everywhere, and he was nowhere. In that black wagon, lined with velvet to absorb the sound of his labored breathing, he built an empire. He did not stop at one circus. He bought a competitor in France. He acquired a menagerie in Germany. He organized the railway logistics, inventing a system of flatbed loading that the military would later study. But he did something else, something that the ledger in my hands reveals in columns of soft, empathetic ink. Look here. Entry, 1852. Medical expenses, trapeze artist M, broken ankle, full salary paid during recovery, surgeon's fee, 50 guineas, look again, 1855. Pension fund established for aging horses, retirement pasture purchased in Sussex. He remembered the straw. He remembered the cold. He remembered Silas Grinchley striking him with a cane. And from the darkness of his seclusion, the man the world called a monster decided to run the most humane business in the industry. He paid his freaks not as exhibits, but as artists. He fired any handler who struck an animal. He built heated wagons for the troupe. He knew that loyalty is a better asset than fear, and in return his people protected him. They knew the secret of the black wagon. They knew who really signed the checks. And if any curious townsperson ever asked too many questions about the gray gentleman who traveled in the rear carriage, the strong man would cross his massive arms, the fire eater would light a torch, and they would simply say, "That is the owner's privacy. You will respect it." He bought their silence with dignity. By 1860, the United Emporiums was generating a profit that rivaled the shipping magnates of Liverpool. The hero was rich, not circus rich, banker rich, but money to him was not for buying yachts or country estates to show off to society. He knew society would never let him in the front door. He didn't want to be in. He wanted to be out. Money was a wall builder. In his 50th year, the hero finally executed the plan he had been saving for since the day he left the clock shop in Oakhaven. He found a property in the south of England, a derelict monastery surrounded by high, ancient stone walls. It was miles from the nearest village. It was a fortress of solitude. He bought it, cash. He hired crews to renovate it, but his instructions were specific. "No mirrors," he wrote. "Remove them all. Every pane of glass must be frosted, except those looking on to the garden. And the walls, raise the walls by 6 feet." When the work was done, he formally retired. He handed the day-to-day operations to a board of trustees he had handpicked, men who feared his intellect more than they reviled his face. On a foggy Tuesday in October, the black wagon rolled through the iron gates of the estate. The gates closed with a heavy clang that echoed through the valley. The lock clicked. And finally, after half a century of hiding in shadows, of wearing hoods, of calculating the cost of a scream, the hero stepped out into the daylight. He stood in his garden. It was noon. The sun was high and bright. There was no one to scream. There was no baker's boy to run in terror. There were only the birds, the wind in the old oaks, and the scent of lavender. He walked. He did not shuffle. He walked with his heavy, dragging step across the grass. He lifted his face, his terrible, magnificent, chaotic face, to the sun, and he let the warmth hit him. He did not flinch. He had done it. He had purchased the one thing that had been denied to him since birth, a sanctuary where he could simply be. He lived there for 15 years. He was not entirely alone. The census records of the time show one other resident, a Mrs. Agatha Miller, a widow, a former librarian he had hired to catalog his vast collection of books. She was 60 when she came to him. She had failing eyesight, cataracts that turned the world into a blur of light and shadow. To her, he was not a monster. He was a voice. He was a mind that could recite Shakespeare and discuss the fluctuating price of grain in Chicago. Imagine them there. The beast and the blind librarian sitting on a stone bench in the garden, drinking tea from fine china. She reading to him when his eye grew tired, him guiding her steps when the path was uneven. There is a letter in the back of this ledger, tucked into a pocket in the leather binding. It was written by her, found after he passed. It says simply, "The world called him ugly because they only have eyes. I called him beautiful because he had a soul that could not be contained by bone." He died in 1872 in his sleep in a bed made of mahogany, covered by a quilt woven by his own employees. When the local doctor, paid a king's ransom to be discreet, came to certify the death, he found the hero lying on his back, hands folded over his chest. The heavy hood he had worn for a lifetime was gone. His face was exposed to the air of his own room. The tension that had held his features in a grimace for 60 years was gone. He looked peaceful. And now we come to the final entry. The reason I brought you to this dusty room, the will. The lawyers expected him to leave his fortune to a hospital, perhaps to research his condition, or maybe to the state, or even to a distant cousin. But our hero had one last transaction to make, one last balance to settle. He left a generous sum to Mrs. Miller, enough to keep her in comfort for 10 lifetimes. He left the circus to the performers, making it the first employee-owned company of its kind. But the bulk of his liquid fortune, the tens of thousands of pounds in gold and stocks, he left it to the village of Oakhaven. Yes, the village that had besieged him, the village that had starved him, the village that had screamed demon and driven him into the mud. But there was a condition. The money was to be used to build a public library, a school, and a town hall. And on the front of that hall, carved into the granite archway above the door, there was to be an inscription. He dictated the exact words in his will. If you go to Oakhaven today, the building still stands. The townspeople took the money. Greed, after all, is the only force stronger than prejudice. They built the school. They educated their children on the gold of a monster. And if you look up at the archway, you will see the final words of the man who mastered the art of the deal. It reads, "Built by the hands you refuse to shake, he forced them to remember him." Every time they walked through that door, every time they learned to read, every time they held a town meeting, they were doing it in his house, on his dime, by his permission. He didn't just survive them, he bought them. So, when you see the drawings of the elephantine man in the papers, when you hear the tales of the poor, suffering creature, remember this book. Pity is a cheap coin. He never wanted it, he wanted respect. And when the world refused to give it to him, he went out and purchased it at wholesale prices. Fate gave him a cage. He turned it into a bank vault. And in the end, he was the only one who held the key. That, my friend, is not a tragedy. That is a triumph. Now, put the book back. The dust settles quickly in here, but the truth stays sharp forever.